Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. How we doing, friends? Maybe we turn this down just a smidge. I don't want to be yelling in y'all's ears. Hi Bagel, am I coming in nice and clear for y'all? Want to make sure y'all hear me before we get into it. Adjusting our little sounds and stuff. La 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 la. Yeah, make sure we have everything right where we want it. And as soon as y'all give me the thumbs up, you can hear me and that we're good, we will hop on into it. And yeah, just make sure that everything's Gucci. Just double checking real quick. Okay, beautiful. Y'all can hear me. Fantastic. How we feeling, friends? Happy Wednesday. I don't know what y'all have been eating as far as food recently, but I'm having ravioli tonight, so I'm hyped. As always, I will remind y'all what we are playing. We are playing Our Life Beginnings and Always with our dude Cove Holden. Unfortunately, for some of you, we are at a point where we are focusing more on Derek. So if you're here for Cove, I do apologize. Good, how are you? I'm making burritos. I'm doing good. Enjoy your burritos, Bagel. So yeah, my understanding, I'm pretty sure Cove makes an appearance in Lemonade. Our goals for today will be responsible, Lemonade, and siblings, leaving us with Boardwalk and the in-between stage of step 2 and 3. That's the thought process, that's the goal. These moments are all so different in length, though, that who knows, we could get through all 4 of Derek's moments today. Yeah, we gonna do the best that we can and see what happens and hopefully just have a good fucking time on stream. Okie dokie, let's hop in responsible. I also just want to say real quick that I personally do love Derek. I think he gives off that golden retriever energy in the sweetest goddamn way. Whether you romance him later or just have him be a very good friend, I think Derek's cool. I know a lot of people prefer Cove, and that is a-okay. So if you prefer Cove, then I'll see you when we get back to more Cove things. Okay. Oh, hold on before we even read. This is gorgeous. This is so pretty. I want to live somewhere with a pool. Yeah, today we are going to focus on giving Derek the love that he deserves. The pool of Derek's condo complex was a perfect setting for a late morning outing. It was early enough that the day hadn't yet reached its hottest. The air still held the crispness of morning. Despite the pleasantness, only you and Derek were there. Of course, given the location of the ocean, maybe everyone else who felt like waterside fun was at the beach. You usually were. The warm roughness of tiles felt odd on your bare feet as you walked further into the pool area. There was no sand to squish between your toes or sharp shells to avoid. You surveyed the area while Derek finished putting his stuff away on a chair. The chlorine was sharp in your senses, and the entire space was so orderly. Lounge chairs sat in neat rows, umbrellas spaced out uniformly. The depth of the pool was marked out in clear text along the sides. Every single element was intentionally and expertly crafted to be convenient for human visitors. It was extremely different from the wild mistress of the sea. I personally probably like pools like a little bit more, but in this world, being that close to the beach all the time, I'd probably like them about the same. Because that's the thing, in my actual life, I am not near a pool or a beach on a regular basis. They're very, rare occasions. Yeah, like them both about the same. Both had their good points. You were up for today's adventure to be something different from your typical day-to-day options. This had been Derek's plan. He let you know about it ahead of time so you could be dressed for the occasion. Swim trunks. And yeah, sure, why not a t-shirt? Your swimming gear was familiar, even if the pool wasn't. You felt prepared. Derek bounded up to you in his own swim trunks, flagrantly ignoring the no running signs in his enthusiasm. Watch, I'm gonna do a cannonball. As soon as he knew he had your attention, he took off to the deep end of the pool. He built up speed and then leapt into the water. His curled up body created a huge splash on impact. Cheer him on, hell yeah, go Derek. See, go Derek. Even though he couldn't hear you from the bottom of the pool, you celebrated the show. He stayed under for a while longer. He touched the pool's bottom before he kicked himself back upward. When Derek's head popped out of the water, he swam to the edge of the pool and propped himself up with a grin. He watched you expectantly. What, you want me to jump in too? Is that what I'm expecting here? Okay, jump in the pool. Like Derek, you gave yourself a bit of a running start. You reached the end, took a deep breath, and leapt as far as you could. Frigid water burst around you, feet first, but soon covering you entirely. You sunk lower into the depths and began to kick. You breached the surface and sucked in the fresh air. You noticed two things. One, that the water wasn't actually freezing when you got used to it, and two, that Derek was clapping for you. Nice, you got some serious airtime. I'd give it a 10 out of 10. As you enjoyed the moment, your thoughts fell back to how you'd gotten here. Last night, Derek had called with a different sort of request. You remembered that his voice had been a mix of nerves and hope. He had a favor to ask, very unexpected for him. Derek's mom needed him to watch his little brothers in the afternoon. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but that was part of his problem. Lately, he had feared that his sports skills weren't as sharp as he wanted them to be. He hadn't been able to practice soccer or football without the distraction of keeping an eye on his brothers. His idea to fix this had been to ask for your help watching the kids. If you agreed to go to the park with him and his brothers, then you could manage his brothers while he had a chance to focus on practice. That's how he explained it. You said yes, and your moms had been more than happy to let you spend the day playing support for Derek. They said it would be a good opportunity to take on some more responsibility. To sweeten the deal, Derek suggested that you come by early so that you both could hit the pool. Nicholas would be sleeping in, and Jorge could spend some one-on-one time with Mrs. Suarez. Welcome, River. What's up? So far, the plan had worked out. Ma dropped you off about 15 minutes ago, and both of Derek's brothers were fully occupied. Mrs. Suarez and Jorge were back in the condo putting together an 800-piece puzzle on the kitchen counter while Nicholas snoozed on the couch. Damn, 800-piece puzzle. You had time to kick back before the moment came to be in charge of small children. A sloshing sound pulled you back to the present. Derek had climbed out of the pool. I'm gonna jump again. Wanna join? Yeah, let's go. You copied Derek's exit from the pool. It took arm strength and caution not to scrape yourself on the texture of the concrete. Once on solid ground, you reversed away from the edge to give yourself enough space for a good jump. Poised to go, you and Derek made eye contact. He leaned forward, balancing on the balls of his feet. I've already done one. It's your turn. But didn't I do one too? I could have sworn I did one too. Offer your hand to Derek so you could jump at the same time? Let's do that. That's cute. Oh, the little blushy boy. Derek accepted your hand eagerly, and you ran towards the pool together. Woo! You leapt and flailed your legs for a split second. Derek lifted your arms into the air and kicked a foot out before you landed in the water. You stretched out and reached up towards the surface, parting your arms to paddle over to dry ground. Derek was laughing boisterously. Oh, y'all, bear with me, that one was new. It was his turn next. By the curve in his grin and the lift of his chin, he looked to be in a mood to impress. His eyebrows drew together in a deep furrow as he considered his launch. Derek took a few bounding steps to the edge, jumped up, and tucked his body in. Unlike his previous cannonball, the energy went into a spin, and he flipped, making a full rotation before he crashed through the surface. The water droplets from the splash dazzled you as they exploded out from his impact. He swam under the water and only came back to the surface after he reached the wall of the pool. He snaked his hands up to the top of the tiles and pushed himself up so that his hips were even with the edge. He twisted and practically rolled out of the pool from there. You're up. Okay. See, if I could, I was never good at like doing tricks and stuff into a pool, but this doesn't have to be completely realistic, so I think I'm gonna have my character do a backflip. Backflip sounds fun. Sounds terrifying to my actual brain, but in this it sounds fun. You planted your feet solidly at the edge of the pool, not facing the water. You bent your legs and prepared. You swung your arms back until, like a pendulum, you swung them forward. The moment your hands passed your knees, you jumped backwards. You tucked your body in tight as you turned all the way around before you hit the water. Whoa, that was awesome! Not them impressing each other with their little pool jumps and flips and stuff. You kept switching back and forth, trading off between silly jumps and then more impressive tricks. From watching Derek's well-practiced dives to performing your own jumps, there was never a boring second. After several leaps, Derek called a break time, and you took a breather at the back stairs of the pool. You waited for your strained heart rate to even out from all the exertion. After a pause of silence, Derek spoke up. He pulled his fist to his cheek and thought, squishing his face slightly. Hey, I probably should have asked before, but have you ever babysat somebody before? Let's see, at 13, No, I don't think I had babysitting experience at 13. I don't think my experience happened till later. Does babysitting a dog count? Me. Derek chuckled and slapped his knee. Excuse me, sorry, tickle in my throat, water to fix it. Nicholas is above any puppy, but that's still something. But I'll be right there if anything goes down. You shrugged. At least his brothers probably wouldn't start chewing on random things, right? Um, I feel like I would be prepared. I'd be prepared for it to be a pain, but do it anyways for Derek. This wouldn't rank in your top 10 days of summer vacation, but Derek was worth some hassle. Hi, Knight. Welcome in. How you doing? Thanks for joining. After that interlude, you both continued to enjoy yourselves and your freedom until a little beeping alarm went off. That's time. He made his way to the lounge chair with his stuff and dug out a small portable clock. It buzzed until he found the stop button. Derek checked the time and narrowed his eyes at the glowing red numbers. He shot you a thumbs up. Let's go up. You helped him gather the towels and grab the rest of the stuff, and then tried to drip as little as possible while rushing through the halls of the complex. When you reached his apartment, he dumped everything in his arms on the ground and scrambled to find his key. Just give me a second. I don't want to knock or anything in case Nicholas is still asleep. He finally spied his soccer ball keychain and snatched up his keys from where they were tangled in his towel. He inserted the key into the lock, and both of you shuffled inside the Suarez home. 3 heads swiveled to face the 2 of you, gazes being drawn to the bundles of neon towels coming in. Mrs. Suarez and Jorge were sitting on bar stools while Nicholas perched on the counter itself with an excited grin. They were working on a puzzle. On your left, Derek leaned closer and spoke under his breath. He's awake. Derek's back! Quick as a blink, Nicholas scrambled on his hands and feet and zipped across the black marble of the counter. Tiny cardboard puzzle pieces scattered. Nicholas, the puzzle! Despite Jorge's frustration, the little whirlwind didn't seem to hear. He was on a mission to reach his bigger brother, not even stopping when he hit the end of the counter. Nicholas stumbled off the edge and Derek instinctively moved forward with a gasp, dropping all his pool stuff except for the towel wrapped around him. Mrs. Suarez caught Nicholas with her forearms hooking under his chest, snatching him from midair. Oof. She hugged her son, holding him securely against her body. A chorus of relieved sighs filled the room. Nicholas still paid no mind to his trail of disasters and began to squirm. He just wanted down already. Derek took another few steps forward, making his way over to the scene. Mrs. Suarez carefully held Nicholas out, her hands under his armpits, and safely set him down on his feet. Nicholas immediately wrapped his arms around Derek's legs. Derek chuckled while tugging up at his towel so Nicholas wouldn't pull it off. Hold on, Nico, you're gonna get wet. Nicholas giggled mischievously and snuggled closer. Derek snuck a quick peek over his shoulder back at you and shrugged. Just as warned, Nicholas now had a damp splotch on his shirt. I'd ask Jorge if his puzzle's alright, because Derek, like everyone else was worried about Nicholas, and now that Nicholas is good, I feel like, hey, like, is your puzzle good? Is it okay? The counter was littered with pieces. You could see that there were large sections of the puzzle put together, and several scattered parts that had been broken back up into many individual pieces. Some had even been knocked to the floor, and you picked up a few up to hand to Jorge. How's the puzzle? Jorge stared at the pieces pinched between your fingers distantly before accepting them. He sighed over the mess. Yeah, it's all right. Jorge nodded at you, appreciating that you had asked. He still seemed unhappy, but no major harm done. Well, Mrs. Suarez's tone was warm with a certain amount of humor to it. She rubbed her hands together and stood up. Derek and Blake are in charge now. Make sure you listen to them. Jorge sourly picked at the puzzle pieces, but gave a grumbled noise to signify he had heard. I'm going to head off to my appointment. She went to gather some things, officially putting you and Derek in charge, but there wasn't 1 second to settle into your new position. We're going swimming? Nicholas looked up and stared with huge, shining eyes. Derek reflexively stiffened. How would he escape the puppy dog look? Derek's eyebrows creased, a small sign of nerves compared to the smooth, pulsating sound of his voice. No, even better. He leaned down and lowered his voice like he was about to share a secret. We're gonna go to the park. Nicholas instantly frowned. He wasn't convinced by Derek's act. He grabbed at Derek's towel. You were swimming. Yeah, but I'm not anymore. I'm going to the park and you can come with me. No. The littlest Suarez whined and stomped his foot. His hands balled up around the neon fabric harshly enough that he almost took the towel from Derek. I want to go to the pool. I want to see Blake's swimsuit. What? Derek's jaw dropped. Neither of you were prepared for that one. Did you hear Nicholas right? You looked down at yourself, currently wrapped in a bright fuzzy towel. You switched your gaze to Derek's youngest brother, your brain trying to make sense of what was happening. Why would you want that? Why does Nicholas want anything? Jorge rolled his eyes and continued mumbling into the counter. It was obvious to him, and he couldn't believe the rest of you were taking so long to catch up. Because Derek does. I feel like I'd be a little amused, but also confused. Yeah, I'm gonna be a little amused because what? Derek narrowed his eyes and whispered harshly, Nicholas, Jorge, you're gonna put me into an early grave. He took a deep breath as he stared at the ceiling. It took him a moment to face you. His voice was firm for someone at his level of embarrassment. I must have said something about hoping you'd remember to bring your swimsuit. I was excited for us to be able to swim, so I did want you to have one. Nicholas does not actually want to see you in a swimsuit. He doesn't even know why he'd want that. He's just saying stuff. You snorted and had to cover your mouth to stop yourself from laughing. Derek shook his head, still blushing, but he relaxed at your obvious amusement. Little kids were so funny. You snuck another look at Nicholas. He had crossed his arms high on his chest and squished his neck down far enough to rest his chin on his wrist. I want to go swimming. His pout intensified when he said it again. He was a very angry little baby. Derek tilted back on his heels, once again driven to look at the ceiling by the strain of this kid. You glanced up there yourself without thinking about it. It was a calm white color with a few light fixtures. When you squinted, you noticed something small and green. It appeared to be one of those sticky hands for kids. Was this another present from the youngest Suarez? You tuned back into Derek. He appeared to have made a decision. All right, I promise you that you can go swimming too, but only after the park. We'll go to the pool as soon as we come back. With the promise officially made, Nicholas lit up. He snatched one of Derek's hands. Let's go. We gotta get to the park so I can swim. While Nicholas celebrated, Derek closed his eyes and some of the worried creases on his face smoothed out. Derek, there's lunch packed in the fridge. Dad will be back before dinner. Gotcha. Thanks, Mom. Have a good one. Mrs. Suarez waved and collected the last of her things, her purse off of the side table. She ruffled Jorge's hair on her way out. You and Derek were alone with the kids. We should really stop leaving puddles everywhere. He gestured at the drops of water pooling at his feet. Good idea. You and Derek took turns changing. You went first while you could faintly hear Derek impressing on his brothers to listen to you too. He must have convinced them to behave for now, as neither Jorge nor Nicholas acted up when Derek took his turn drying off and clothing himself. Can you get our lunch from the fridge? I'm gonna pack my gear. No problem. You walked casually to the kitchen. Jorge hadn't moved from his bar stool even once since you'd gotten back. Meanwhile, Nicholas followed Derek like a possessed shadow that was even more energetic than the original. He zipped around, occasionally trying to place things in Derek's backpack for him. So far, Derek had said no to the rubber duck, but he agreed to bring an extra pair of socks that Nicholas was determined were absolutely necessary. Okay, got everything. Derek returned with a backpack in one hand and Nicholas's small hand in the other. We're going, Jorge. Ready, Blake? I'm pretty sure. Sure. He pushed away from the counter and finally hopped off his chair with the enthusiasm of a plank of wood. We're going! Derek hid his smile at Nicholas's echo and ushered everyone outside. He locked the condo behind him, and you began the trip to the nearby park. The park for the Suarez boys was the big park for your family. Their condo complex was only a short distance to the public outdoor recreational area your moms sometimes drove you to. It was still a beautiful day outside and had only gotten a few degrees warmer from your morning swim. The field was bustling with other groups of people enjoying themselves. Derek led the way to a wide-open part of the grass that no one else was using. He stopped in the middle of the field and turned 180 degrees to face the little boys behind him. He shrugged his backpack off of his shoulders and dropped it to the ground. He kneeled down to root around inside. Jorge and Nicholas waited in place for their brother. Derek gathered a couple of things in his arms before pushing off the ground with his knee to get up again. He held a football in his left hand and a soccer ball in his right. All right, Nicholas, Jorge, I've got to practice, but you can too. Which one do you want? Football. Real ball. You raised an eyebrow at their shouts. Derek leaned over to you and whispered with a laugh. He means the soccer ball. It's real because it's actually ball-shaped. Is that a problem? They want both. Derek simply grinned. I thought so. He tossed Jorge the football first. Jorge caught it from out of the air with one hand and began to bounce it up and down in his fingers, feeling the weight of it. Derek popped the soccer ball gently over to Nicholas, who watched his brother intently. Nicholas had to catch it with both hands. He wrapped his arms around the ball and hugged it to his chest. and with his brothers taken care of, Derek crouched again to reveal a third ball. He'd brought a second soccer ball. Derek had been prepared. He then sprung back to his feet, another problem diverted. Jorge, Nicholas, you can use this half of the field. I'll use that half. Blake can be your ref, so don't get too far from them, alright? Okay. Jorge tossed his football in the air, preoccupied. It spun in an arc downward. Alright, I'm gonna practice. Nicholas embraced his soccer ball tighter, pressing his cheek into it. You wondered just how he'd practice with it when the equipment was about as big as his head. The child looked completely content with the world, but Derek's eyes narrowed. Once again, he shared some Nicholas info into your ear. Watch him. It's not over. He copies what I say, but it's not what he means. You snuck a peek at Nicholas. He appeared so innocent, clutching his ball and staring at a patch of clover in the grass, but you'd interacted with him enough to not question his potential for trouble. You'd make sure to keep an eye on the kid. I will. Thanks, Blake. You're a lifesaver. Derek held his soccer ball with both hands and cheered. Bye, bros. Bye. Bye, bro. Derek put on a smile as he picked up his bag, tucked his soccer ball under an arm, and jogged to his side of the field. He didn't have time to lose. You stood with the younger Suarez brothers, effectively turned loose. Jorge stared at you with uncertainty, while Nicholas's mischievous smirk could only make you guess what he was thinking. You weren't going to make Mr. and Mrs. Suarez regret letting you come, and you especially weren't going to disappoint Derek. You were going to watch those boys. Time to be in charge. I'm going to play over there. He pointed vaguely to the opposite side of the field from Derek and trotted off to entertain himself. You let him go without argument. Jorge wasn't the problem child. When you saw him settle in, throwing around his football and chasing it, you smiled. You would only need to manage Nicholas. You aimed your grin towards him, but instead of being in the clover patch, he was missing. You snapped your head back and forth until you spotted him in a fumbling dash across the grass, struggling to keep his soccer ball from slipping out of his small arms. When Derek said watch him, he had really meant it. Maybe chasing puppies around had prepared you for this after all. I don't know, run over and pick him up? I don't think it has to be like a big deal. Yeah, run over and pick him up. Even with your longer legs, it was still tricky to catch the kid. He shrieked and laughed when you plucked him off the grass. The soccer ball tumbled from his arms. He reached for it with all his might, stretching his arms and kicking his legs for momentum. You couldn't contain him, so you carefully placed him back on his feet before he could fall. Wait, he wants to do everything. Oh, hey, Nicholas, you're hanging out with me just like Derek does. Nicholas paused, finally interested. He raised one of his bushy eyebrows. You'd said the magic words, like Derek. He spends a lot of time coming to see me, remember? Now it's your turn to be the person I have fun with. Pretty cool. Nicholas's cheeky grin fell, but his eyes began to sparkle. He pumped one of his fists in the air. Yeah, I'm hanging out with Blake. With him cheering, you sighed in relief. You made a mental note if you needed Nicholas's attention, just mention Derek. Let's go back to the clover patch. That's a nice place for hanging out. You led him closer to Jorge. Even if the middle Suarez could manage himself, he shouldn't be entirely on his own. The only times your gaze strayed from the little Suarez was when you blinked or sent the occasional glance Jorge's way. Jorge continued to enjoy his time at the park without any need for assistance, so you spent most of your energy on the mischief maker. And after smoothing out the initial bump of the afternoon, things evened out. At least, things were fine until the trial known as lunch arrived. It started with the reappearance of Derek. His presence sent Nicholas into hyperdrive. He bounced on the tips of his toes and waved both his hands frantically. "Derek's back!" He tackled his older brother and latched around Derek's left leg. Jorge, like half of the entire park, noticed the shout. He jogged over to see if any important updates were happening without him. Derek winked. "Hey, bros." "Hi, Blake. I hope you're doing all right." As he spoke, he let his bag drop to the ground. He crouched over it and scrounged up the packed lunches. It's all good." You gave a thumbs up and Derek grinned, very impressed. "Yeah, it looks that way. Great job. Nicholas didn't attack me from behind even once." Derek set aside 3 paper bags in the grass. One in front of Nicholas, another next to Jorge, and the third went to you. Derek kept the 4th lunch inside his backpack. He only pulled a water bottle out from it and closed the bag back up. "Okay, Nicholas, you've got to eat now with Blake and Jorge." Nicholas clenched Derek's jeans more desperately as he whined. "You're not going to eat with me?" Derek scratched the back of his head and gave a longing glance back to where he'd been practicing. "Do you mind, Blake? I was hoping I'd have more time to practice." He bit his lip, hope clear on his face. He had confidence that you could handle lunch alone. I mean, he should eat lunch too." "I'm torn. 'Cause he really should eat though, dude. You can't just miss your lunch, but he doesn't get to practice often. I doubt he does this like all the time." "Sure, good luck with your practice." "Thanks, I owe you one." Nicholas's whimpering never stopped being high-pitched background noise. Derek ruffled his hair. "Hey, check this out." He picked up Nicholas's soccer ball and placed it on top of his own head. Nicholas's jaw dropped theatrically as Derek fully stood up while keeping it balanced. "Wow." Nicholas cheered and jumped up and down, still holding on to Derek's leg. Derek bent his knees and then popped up fast enough to launch the ball in the air. He caught it on his head again. "Ha!" Nicholas let go of his brother to clap. Derek grinned at Nicholas, but his gaze flicked to you for a second. The show over, Derek inclined his head and let the soccer ball drop into his hands. He held it out to Nicholas. "Make sure to eat a good lunch, okay? Then you can get back to practicing." "Okay." Nicholas spoke into the soccer ball he had cuddled to his face. He'd been starstruck enough that he couldn't disagree with anything his biggest brother said. Derek waved at you and Jorge before heading off to where he'd left his soccer ball, carrying only the water bottle with him. Jorge promptly took a seat in the grass by the lunch bags. Nicholas put the soccer ball on his head. It immediately rolled off. He just tried again. You reached over to the lunches. Each bag had a clearly written name in black marker ink. Jorge collected his bag, you had yours, and you attempted to give the last one to its proper owner. But Nicholas showed zero interest in the bag. You imagined he would have been more interested in Derek's lunch bag, even though they probably had the same meals. Jorge scoffed, knowing his brother was going to be difficult again. He took a sandwich from his bag. From looks alone, you guessed it as sliced deli turkey, a pale-colored cheese, and some veggies. With Nicholas clearly busy, you took his sandwich out for him. The sandwich was ham and some sort of orangey cheese, cheddar almost certainly. You offered the food directly to Nicholas and he still didn't bite. He wanted to play. How about I help you eat while you practice? Nicholas carefully contemplated your suggestion. You held your breath, anticipating an oncoming battle, but then his seriousness melted into a bright grin. All right. He securely held the ball with both hands on top of his head, and then in one fell swoop, Nicholas leaned over to tear a chunk of sandwich right out of your hand. Glancing over to Jorge, you saw he was quietly enjoying his lunch. You relaxed now that the situation was back under control. You lifted the sandwich up for Nicholas to strike again. He gladly took another big chomp out of it, and you realized far too late that his focus on the ball was waning. It tumbled away as he swallowed and leaned in for another bite. Unfazed, Nicholas continued eating, and so, with your free hand, you took a bite of your own sandwich before the opportunity vanished. It was definitely an interesting way to enjoy a meal break. Finishing the last corner of your square-shaped meal, you wondered if Mrs. Suarez had talked to one of your moms beforehand about lunch. The sandwich was made how you would have had it at home. She was either prepared or very lucky, but considering what her oldest son was like, you were guessing luck had nothing to do with it. Along with the sandwiches, there were also bags of carrots, celery, and a few cookies. Between the three of you, it wasn't long before all the snacks were gone. With nothing left to nibble on, Nicholas yawned and curled up in the grass, cuddling the soccer ball against his chest. Jorge stood up, watching his little brother fall asleep. Once he was certain that Nicholas was down for the count, he started cleaning up the trash. You admired the maturity he showed for his age. It wasn't just Derek who had that streak after all. You helped gather the trash while musing about the Suarez brothers. Derek was the oldest and whose parents relied on, while Nicholas was the baby of the family. And for a little kid, he was a force to be reckoned with. Jorge was the one stuck in the middle. Compliment his football throws. Jorge spun around on his heel. He seemed stunned, like he wasn't sure if he imagined your compliment or not. In a couple years, you could totally get on a junior football team. You nodded, and a blush grew on his face until it reached his ears. Okay. He hurriedly went back to what he was doing before. Jorge was embarrassed, but you also noticed there was a bounce in his step that wasn't there before. He liked the little compliment. That's so cute. The park suddenly felt empty with Nicholas asleep. He took up a lot of space despite his tiny size. Chuckling to yourself, you found a comfortable spot in the grass and scanned the area for Derek. You eventually caught sight of him running in the distance. Even from here, you could tell that Derek was persistent about his practice. He went back and forth, repeating the same set of moves, reassessing and refining his form every time. Though it wasn't long before he paused to wipe his brow with his black wristband. Derek happened to glance your way at that moment and realized he had an audience of one. He gave a huge wave with both hands that required he cross both his arms over his head, and before you knew it, Derek's strides were bringing him back over to you and his brothers. Phew, that's it. I'm gonna be done with practice. I'm back. Welcome back. Thanks for watching Jorge and Nicholas. I didn't mean for it to be so long. It's okay, I'm happy I could help out. The sincerity in your voice had Derek bashfully keeping his eyes on his shoes instead. Your heart rate picked up as he chose to respond in kind. I'll probably end up saying it again, but thanks, Blake. You're a lifesaver. Next, he shifted his attention over to his brothers. Jorge gave a little wave. He'd been waiting patiently for his big brother to wrap up his conversation with you. We're going back. Jorge simply got up, not needing any more guidance, while Derek kneeled in the grass to nudge Nicholas out of dreamland. A single eye cracked open at first, and then they both popped wide open when he realized who was with him. Derek! Nicholas sprang off the ground, wrapping his arms around his big brother like a vice grip and nuzzled into his chest. Derek gave Nicholas's head a single pat. Practice was good today. Let's go home. Let's go home. Nicholas's hushed voice, echoing his brother's, put a warm smile on your face. Surveying the area, you made sure that nothing would be accidentally left behind. Then you breathed a sigh of relief. You made it through your first time solo babysitting. Although Derek was technically still nearby the whole time, so it wasn't completely solo, but you weren't bothered by that. Derek trusted you with his siblings, and they were both still in one piece. With your leadership, no one got lost, injured, swallowed something they shouldn't have, or even declared that they hated you for eternity. So in your book, you'd say it went fairly well. The 15-minute walk back from the park passed by pleasantly. The late afternoon sun fell behind you, and your shadow soon stretched across the sidewalk. You wiggled your fingers and then exaggerated your hands' movement in order to watch the shadows change. Meanwhile, next to you, Derek was finally eating his lunch. Although he had to eat a sandwich with the hand Nicholas wasn't clasping tightly onto. Jorge entertained himself with the football he still carried. He periodically tossed it up into the air and caught it again. You could easily imagine how often the three of them had made this trip before, with only the three of them, but you didn't feel out of place strolling alongside the group. It felt natural. Beaming, you found your gaze settling on Derek again. You knew without a doubt that the way you felt was because of him. He was so good at making you feel welcome. In time, you made it safely back and Derek dropped his bag on the floor with a quiet sigh of relief. Any hope he had to take things easy for a second immediately evaporated. We're going to the pool as soon as we come back. Nicholas's joy was palpable, parroting back Derek's promise from earlier in the day. As the words dawned on him, Derek closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Yup, we are. Get ready. And that was all the approval Nicholas and Jorge needed. They both dashed off to their shared bedroom to get changed. Derek sluggishly opened his eyes, but his tiredness softened when he looked at you. Practice is done. If you want to stay up here until your moms can come get you, that's cool. Derek gave a partial shrug and then ran a hand through his hair shyly. We don't have to go swimming again. What? You promised we get to go to the pool again. You put your hands on your hips and pouted. He laughed and raised his hands in self-defense. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that you knew you had options. It wasn't much longer before the younger kids came running out to rejoin you and Derek. They both wore their neon-colored swimsuits and had towels wrapped around their shoulders. Nice job. You even remembered your floaty vest, Nicholas. Derek kneeled down to make sure the safety device was properly secured. Nicholas stood tall with his chest out proudly. He didn't fear the scrutinization. I did the straps for him. Perfect, thanks. Jorge brightened just as his younger brother had. Standing back up, Derek shifted his attention to you. Same quick change strategy from earlier? Yeah. You darted off to get changed first. Derek nodded seriously when you returned to take over for him. He re-emerged a couple minutes later and diligently went over to the counter to write something down. Curious, you inched closer. Just gotta leave a note so Dad knows where we are, then we can go. Oh, sounds good. Everything was squared away, as Derek was always sure to do, and the four of you marched right back out of the apartment for another excursion. By the time the distinct smell of chlorine tickled your nose, the sun had fallen low in the sky. You circled around some nearby lounge chairs and deemed them capable of keeping your things safe. Inspecting the gleaming water, you noticed that Jorge and Nicholas hadn't moved towards the pool yet. Both of the little boys were watching Derek like hawks. You weren't picked up enough this afternoon to know it because Jorge didn't want to do anything without permission. You'd picked up enough this afternoon to know that it was because Jorge didn't want to do anything without permission, and Nicholas didn't want to do anything Derek wasn't doing. Here I go. And Derek himself knew it too. He didn't keep them waiting. Derek offered his brothers an encouraging wave and strode over to the pool. Follow him into the water. Wait for me. Derek paused at the pool's edge and glanced over his shoulder. He beamed at you. All right, on 3. 1, 2, 3. You simultaneously leapt into the pool, making a huge splash. After a few seconds, you made your way to the surface to take a breath. Derek, meanwhile, stayed under. The other Suarez sons followed. Jorge jumped in without any hesitation, but Nicholas sped right to the edge only to come to an abrupt stop. His toes curled around the edge of the pool and his lips were pressed into a tight frown. Nicholas tipped his head and stared down at the water, clutching his hands together. He was scared to jump. Nicholas would rather the pool come the rest of the way to him, but it wasn't being a good sport. Derek and Jorge popped out of the water with matching wide grins and droplets clinging to the tips of their hair. Neither were surprised that they were missing their baby brother. All right. Woohoo! That was awesome. Nicholas's cry for help came out in a tiny, impatient squeak. He began wiggling in place. Derek chuckled and swam over to a shallow spot. The 6-year-old followed closely, toddling along the edge. When his feet touched the pool's solid bottom, Derek stood up. He kindly held his arms out towards his brother. Come on in, Nico. The water's fine. Trusting him completely, Nicholas let go of his fear. He took a step over the side and walked into his favorite person's hold. Derek embraced Nicholas as he dropped against his chest. Then Derek slowly lowered him closer to the water before he completely let his little brother go. Nicholas bobbed under with a small splash and broke out again in an instant like a buoy. He was bursting at the seams with excitement. Woo! Nicholas made the most of his new floating freedom by dog paddling around the shallow end. Checking on Jorge, you noticed that he was sticking to the center of the pool. He bounced himself from the floor to the surface for air, then pushed back down to do it all over again. He leapt all around in a circle. Derek rested an arm across the pool's edge and took a moment to watch his brothers too. You swam over to Derek and settled against the wall with him. You closed your eyes and sighed. The water's temperature was pleasantly warm against the cooling evening air. Derek kept his main focus on his family, though he spared a moment to tilt his head in your direction. A few beads of water trailed from his hairline down to the side of his jaw. Babysitting went as well as you thought, huh? Yeah, I think it went pretty well. My brothers are fun. Some of the time. He chuckled at his own joke and ran a damp hand down his face to try getting at least some of the water off. The final rays of sunlight cast a warm glow on his skin, and the pool sparkled as he finally turned his attention directly towards you. You felt toastier all of a sudden, like someone had pulled the sun back up to the center of the sky. Derek's mouth turned into his usual wonderful smile. I don't know what I'd do without them. He does sound like a proud dad, though. He smirked at your teasing, but it quickly lost its force as his cheeks grew pink. Derek hid his face in his hands. I don't even want to think about being a real parent right now. Being the oldest kid is enough for me. Shaking his head, he kept his brothers in sight. The affection returned to his expression. I am proud of them, though. Jorge and Nicholas remained engrossed in their own watery adventures, while you and Derek kept track of them. You were in mid-conversation when the sound of footsteps echoed off the walls surrounding the pool. Derek shot an arm out of the water and waved at the newcomer. Dad! Good evening. Dad! Dad? All of the Suarez boys eagerly paddled over to the end of the pool where their father stood. They moved together in the water with their heads beside each other and their legs kicked out behind them like a pile of seal pups. Welcome home. Thank you, Jorge. Mr. Suarez's voice was sweet as he observed his children's happy faces. Eventually, he spotted you as well, and he tucked his fingers into the edge of his vest with vigor. Oh, this is a pool party today. You know what a party should have? The proper food. Let's order pizza for dinner tonight. Yeah. Laughing with excitement, Nicholas started smacking the palms of his hands against the water's surface, making several bursting splashes. Jorge flicked the droplets from the tips of his fingers at Nicholas in retaliation. Chuckling over the scene, Mr. Suarez brought a hand up and held onto his chin. He scratched at his beard with his thumb. Half cheese, half pepperoni for the first, correct? Yes. Pepperoni! Nicholas threw both his arms in the air as he cheered. Mr. Suarez nodded, pleased his littlest ones still had predictable tastes. Okay, and meat and veggie supreme for Irene and I on the second. He settled his gaze on Derek and you for the final decision. Suggestions for what the final half should be? Blake, you pick. You floated over closer to Derek as you thought about it. Barbecue chicken is good. Hawaiian is good. I am kind of curious, Derek, what do you normally get? Usually the barbecue chicken, but you should get whatever you want. I like the other stuff too, so don't worry. In that case, we're gonna go barbecue chicken. Derek gave you a big thumbs up for that. So in full, half cheese and half pepperoni, half supreme and half barbecue chicken. Exactly. Thank you, children. I'll put the order in now. I'll come back to let you know when it's ready, but until then, continue to play. Thanks, Dad. Bye. Thanks, Dad. Bye, Mr. Suarez. Mr. Suarez closed the pool gate behind him, leaving you kids to your fun. In Mr. Suarez's absence, Derek took charge again. All right, you heard it. Dad's ordering pizza, so it'll be here in like 30 minutes. So think fast. What's the last thing you want to do before we have to leave the pool? Nicholas furrowed his brow, thinking as hard as he could. He scrunched his face together in frustration when nothing came to mind. Meanwhile, Jorge put a hand to his chin and tilted his head to the side. He stared up and off into space as he considered the question. While they were distracted, you made the first strike in a splash fight. 1000% do that. The younger Suarez brothers may have been unsure or overwhelmed with how they wanted to spend their remaining pool time, but you weren't. You knew exactly what you wanted to do. You subtly angled your position in the water, carefully deciding your plan of attack. The corner of your mouth bent, and you flung a mighty splash towards Derek. He ended up with a face full of water, and he sputtered before shaking it off with laughter. As he regained his composure, Derek brushed a hand down his face again to wipe some droplets away. Blake, I'm sure you're aware of what this means. Derek's stare narrowed with a fierce, amused look of determination. You matched it and gave an added, slow nod. I believe I do. This means war. He swiftly sent a shot of water in your direction. Nicholas cackled at your exchange, and he started to excitedly beat the water's surface and sent droplets crashing in all directions. You twisted away from their attacks, and the second the water settled, you struck. Pushing your hands forward, you sent another big wave crashing towards the brothers. Derek sent splashes with both hands on each of his sides, juggling you and Nicholas. Nicholas pooled water, cupping it in his hands, and he threw it into the air. Hi, Darkwing. How are you, friend? The droplets carelessly poured down onto everyone. Nicholas was dangerous in this fight. He was willing to take a hit to get a hit. Out of the four of you, Jorge enacted the best defense strategy. He took a deep breath and held it while he slid under the water. Only his hands remained at the surface, and they rapidly splashed in all directions. Jorge's strategy kept you all on your toes in order to avoid his scatter shot. Whenever he came up for air, Derek made sure to be ready to take the shot. It was a grand battle. The four of you thoroughly enjoyed your time at the pool. It flew by so fast that you were surprised when you spotted Mr. Suarez cruising down the water's edge once more. Dinner's here, and even better, Mom's home. Yay! The youngest Suarez threw his wet confetti into the air one more time. Even his dad wasn't safe from it. Mr. Suarez took it in stride and wiped his glasses against his vest. Derek was out of breath, but he beamed. Let's go get some food. Yeah. Mr. Suarez led the way to the apartment, and the four of you kids marched with an eager spring in your steps. Despite being wrapped in towels, you dripped water the whole way there. The savory smell of hot cheese and garlic crust was there to greet you when you arrived at the door. You could hear the musical words of Mrs. Suarez, too. Welcome home. Hi. Hi, Mom. Hi, Mom. Feeling a bit awkward and out of place, you gave a tiny wave. Mrs. Suarez didn't miss it, and her voice softened as she spoke to you first. Hello, Blake. I hope you had fun today. I did. We had lots of fun. Very good. Mrs. Suarez then went over to the kitchen where the food was set on the counter. She popped the boxes open and delightedly glanced over at her husband. This was such a good idea. Thank you. They're so cute. Stop. I love them. Mr. Suarez dipped his head in a tiny bow. He followed that by gesturing a hand towards the food. Come get dinner, youngest to oldest order. Despite the order given, it was no surprise that Jorge was the one who moved first. You figured Nicholas would wait for Derek even if he didn't have to. Jorge tore off a paper towel from the roll and used it to grab a slice of plain cheese pizza. He hot-footed it back over to the entryway, standing there so he wouldn't bring water any further into the apartment. You can go next, Blake. It'll be easier that way. The food smelled even better up close. Gotta get that barbecued chicken, let's go! You hurried back to the entryway with your dinner. Derek went next, tiptoeing over with Nicholas at his heels. He grabbed a slice of pepperoni and passed it to Nicholas. Derek then grabbed a slice of barbecue chicken for himself, but instead of going to the entryway, he went to an open space on the floor. You curiously watched as Derek laid his towel on the floor, then sat down on it, crossing his legs. Nicholas plopped down on the towel right next to him and started on one of his pizza crust corners. I'll stay standing with Jorge, why not? You didn't mind eating on your feet, but you also didn't give yourself much time to think about it. Taking a big mouthful, you focused on filling your belly instead. Finally, Mr. and Mrs. Suarez got their slices of pizza. They stood in the living room in between the spots their sons had taken. So, how did you spend your day while we were out? We did lots of things. In between taking big bites of pizza, the Suarez family started taking turns telling stories about their day. Nicholas recounted the events of the day with the most enthusiasm, even though they were the same plot points from his brother's stories and the ones you'd witnessed firsthand. From his perspective, the events were almost mythically amazing. Storytelling was hungry work, so the slices didn't last long at all. The food was chipped away piece by piece until everyone was stuffed. Nicholas laid down on the floor, limbs stretched out and still wrapped in his towel. He was completely tuckered from the day. Mr. Suarez plucked him off the floor and held him under one arm. Bath time. Come on, Junior. Yes, Dad. Nicholas accepted his fate and his arms hung limply down. Jorge crumpled up his paper towel into a ball and tossed it into the trash. He followed his dad. Thank you, Gregorio. Mrs. Suarez watched them go with gentle affection in her gaze. She patted her husband's shoulder as he passed by and then strolled over to you and Derek. And thank you for a good day's work. I appreciate you both taking care of Nicholas and Jorge today. Her cheeriness reminded you so much of Derek's. She pointed her thumb over her shoulder. Dad and I will take them from here. Thanks, Mom. You could see the wave of relief wash over him as clearly as the actual water you had just swam in. I'll keep an ear out for the phone. Pamela said she'd call when they're on their way here to get Blake. Okay. After that, Mrs. Suarez excused herself to go help get Jorge and Nicholas ready for bedtime. When she disappeared down the hall, Derek leaned back on the palms of his hands. He lazily rolled his head in your direction. We can get dressed again. Then would you want to hang out in my room until your moms get here? Yeah, let's do that. You can get changed first. He stretched his legs out on the floor while you stood up. You could feel a slight ache in your muscles from today's activities. It wasn't bad. You'd given your all during your babysitting adventure. Gathering your things up in your arms, you left to get changed. It wasn't long before you and Derek went over to his room for some siblingless free time. Hold on, his room is this is the most Derek room I could picture, honestly. Because he's just a sporty little dude. He's a sporty little guy. He's even got the little statues over there. Like, stop. I also like whatever this poster is. Derek opened his bedroom door and gestured for you to lead the way. You went in while he followed close behind, shutting the door once more. Your eyes widened as you scanned the small space. Usually, you were outside when you hung out with Derek, so this was the first time that you'd been inside his room. Within reach of his neatly made bed was a bookshelf filled with novels. Various scattered soccer balls and footballs stuck out around the books and furniture. Things were arranged and organized with the same care Derek put into most things he did. If there was more time, you were sure there were tons more trinkets and treasures to spot here, like a game of I Spy. It wasn't big, but Derek made the most of his small piece of the world. Are you sure you don't have enough soccer balls and footballs? You pivoted on your heels to face him. Derek laughed, and you put your hands on your hips and raised a skeptical eyebrow. You saw how things went down at the park today. I like to be prepared. And I heard you should have at least 2 backups of stuff that's most important in your life. When you put it like that, then no, I don't think you have nearly enough. We gotta fill the room with them. You both bent at the waist, giggling at the image. Composing himself, Derek rubbed at his eyes with the palm of his hand. Honestly, it's just an easy gift my relatives go for when they don't know what else I might want. At least I'll never run out of stuff to practice with. But anyway, sorry I don't have any chairs in here. You can sit on my bed if you want. Thanks, I appreciate that. Yeah, take a seat. After the busy day you had, it was without a doubt nice to relax on something soft. Derek's expression brightened since you took him up on his offer. Derek crossed over to the foot of his bed and sat there on the end of it, his jaw stretched open in a huge yawn that he quickly covered with his hand. Phew, we're finally done. There was no missing the proud satisfaction burning in his green eyes, but you could also consequently see the places where he was wilting. Sometimes you kind of worried about how he threw himself wholeheartedly into things all the time. How often do you babysit? Well, he shifted his gaze away from you. Derek pinched at the blanket under his fingers while he thought about your question. Pretty often, I guess. Not all the time. Oh. Derek stretched his arms high in the air and yawned again. His eyelids drooped as he turned towards you. Gradually, the carefree warmth faded from his demeanor. His face fell into a quiet frown when his hands had returned to his lap. You don't have to do it again, Blake. Whether it's a good time or a bad time, it's just a lot of time and you have your own things to deal with. Your brows bent at that. Tilting your head, you couldn't help but think about how much of Derek's days went to his brothers. You definitely didn't seem to match how things were with your sister and you. It definitely didn't seem to match how things were with your sister and you. But then, as if summoned by your thoughts about him, the bedroom door creaked open just enough to let a giggling Nicholas slip in. He threw his hands in the air. I'm dressed! With a loud thud, the door swung fully open and Jorge marched in with an extremely annoyed scowl. He put his hands on his hips. Nicholas, we're playing in the living room, not Derek's room. Jorge reached for his younger brother, but Nicholas scurried up onto the bed. He warily peeked at Jorge from behind Derek's shoulder. Derek notably didn't say a single word, nor did he appear surprised about the intrusion at all. The only movement he made was a slight pat on the mess of hair on Nicholas's head like usual. What wasn't usual was the distant look on his face. He'd accepted the reality at hand, but did not welcome it. Mr. and Mrs. Suarez crowded into the room next. Excuse us. Sorry, Derek. He slipped away in a flash. Yeah. Come on, Nicholas. Let Derek and Blake have some peace. The youngest Suarez stubbornly clung onto Derek's arm. His cheeks puffed out angrily. Nicholas, go hang out with Mom and Dad. Don't you want to see them too? They missed you today. Don't you want to see Mom and Dad too? Come on, Derek. Nicholas loosened his grip as he shifted to get a better look at his big brother. Derek sighed spiritlessly. I do, but I have a friend over right now. I'll spend time with Mom and Dad and you later. Nicholas bent forward and grasped Derek's pant leg. He brought out the big guns and stared up at him with his most pitiful eyes and a matching pout. Don't be sad, it's been a happy day. Nicholas immediately whipped his head in your direction. He clearly had forgotten that you were even still there. Right? Feeling more awkward by the second, you paused while the youngest Suarez did nothing but stare. Eventually, you shrugged. I had fun. I thought we all did, and we're all still here together, so there's no need to be sad when we're nearby in other rooms. Tears started welling up, and he turned back to his big brother. Nicholas's jaw clenched as he tightened his grip on his brother's leg. Nicholas, we're reading a story, right now. Nicholas angrily shook his head as she advanced across the room. She unapologetically peeled her smallest child off of Derek. The young boy let out a high-pitched whine for the entire extraction. Jorge frowned sympathetically over the confrontation while Derek winced at the noise. When the deed was done, the middle son followed his mom out of the room. You could still hear Nicholas's piercing cry as he was carried away. I'm very sorry about the interruption. Continue as you were. None of us were ever here. He gave the both of you an encouraging smile before carefully shutting the door again. It was finally silent. Derek kept an eye out until he honestly believed that there wouldn't immediately be another sibling disaster. When he deemed it safe, he let out a quick sigh in an attempt to choke back a harsher groan. Derek flopped back against the mattress with another huff and stretched his arms out at his sides. His arms twitched and his fingers curled into fists. There's never any privacy here. How am I still having to deal with things even after spending almost a whole day with them? You held your tongue, waiting patiently for him to get it all out. Derek muttered grievances under his breath with a harsh glare aimed at the ceiling for a good minute and screwed his mouth shut. I'm sorry, Derek. Genuinely, that's rough, dude. When he hadn't added anything else, the apology tumbled out of your mouth. There wasn't a single thing you could do to change anything about his day-to-day, and that made you feel horrible. His head rolled over in your direction. He didn't say a word. Instead, he surprised you with a weak smile, and you realized that just being there was enough. Evening his breath, Derek folded his arms across his chest and squeezed his eyelids shut. You could tell by the tension in his face that he was still bothered. He was thinking hard, searching for something. I can make this work. His low mumble was followed by a pause that had you intrigued. And then he jumped forward so that he was sitting upright again. The grin you were so used to seeing was back in full force. Blake, want to go back to the pool? Nobody's gonna be there this late, and my bros are not gonna be able to leave the house. We don't have to get in or even change clothes. I think it'd just be kind of a nice place to talk and that sort of thing. Avoiding your gaze, Derek nervously rubbed the back of his head. You could tell he was trying his hardest to be nonchalant, but he wasn't exactly succeeding. Good thinking. All right. Derek leapt up to his feet and turned, holding a hand out for you to take. Definitely take his hand. Derek squeezed you back and helped pull you to your feet. Let's go. The door slowly creaked open as Derek peeked out, double-checking that the coast actually was clear. He gave you a thumbs up. I don't see Nicholas. I think we're good. You returned his thumbs up, silently hoping that this wasn't the calm before the storm. Derek led you into the living room, where you found his dad and Jorge sitting together on the couch. Hello. Mom has Nicholas in his room, enraptured in another exciting session of story time. Good. Blake and we're gonna go down to the pool area to hang out. Is that okay? Of course. He chuckled, knowing exactly what Derek was trying to accomplish. Jorge was perfectly happy where he was with his dad, so he waved goodbye to you both. Don't keep Blake out too late. I won't. Thanks, Dad. Derek whispered with complete confidence. You gave your appreciation in an equally hushed tone. Thank you, Mr. Suarez. The last thing either of you wanted was to alert the youngest Suarez that anything fun was happening without his knowledge, so you both silently slipped out of the apartment. Once you were free from the condo's walls, Derek's excitement was palpable. You picked up the pace and raced to the pool gate. For the third time in a single day, you and Derek stepped foot on the condo complex's private pool deck, but you soon realized you hadn't seen everything it had to offer yet. Under the cover of night, the pool was completely aglow with lights set into the bottom. The bright blue struck you as inviting breaths of steam drifted off the top of the water, whispering how warm it was. The closed-in space was clear of any other people, and it had been like that for a while considering the stillness of the pool. Not a single ripple disrupted its aquamarine surface. Here, you'd have peace and privacy. Derek was drawn to the water like a moth to a flame. He wordlessly rolled up his jeans and tugged off his sneakers and socks, then dunked his feet right into the pool, up to the middle of his calf. He stretched and wiggled his bare toes in the comfortable embrace of the heated pool on a summer night. You joined Derek at the edge. Put your feet in as well, why not? You removed your own shoes and let your feet soak in the pool. It was as pleasant as its sparkling appearance promised. The water had none of the slight chill that the air did. It was the perfect amount of heat. Derek wrapped both his hands around the smooth tile edge and tilted back. One of his legs kicked up as his back drifted down like his upper and lower body were each one side of a seesaw. He grinned playfully at you. So, what were we talking about? Well, you were saying that you liked having my help, but it wasn't my job to watch your brothers and that I didn't have to do it again. Oh, yeah. He solemnly brought his torso back up until he was hunched over the water. He stared down at it. All his lightheartedness had disappeared in an instant. Things were already kind of a bummer before it got interrupted. That sucks. There wasn't any heart in it, but Derek managed a chuckle. Sorry for making my problems your problems. He dug his fingers into the side of his hair, scratching at it in frustration. I don't even know what my problem is. They came in the room for 5 seconds. I'm so dramatic. That's not dramatic, and it wasn't the only thing that happened today. Yeah. Derek crossed his arms tight and pushed them against the top of his legs. The blue water rippled around him as his legs moved against the pool wall. He pressed his heels into it. The pressure that had been only on the inside was coming out. It's just, the thing is, Nicholas and Jorge need me all the time, and my parents need me because they need me. I don't want to let them down, I really don't, but it's hard. Every day it's like I'm gonna mess up and disappoint somebody. He bit his tongue and released his limbs from the locked positions they'd been stuck in. He couldn't scrub the furrow away from his brows. Forget it, everyone has stuff to worry about. It's not just me. Mom has to take care of them way more than I do, and Dad works a job pretty much the entire day. Yeah, but here's the thing. They're the parents. They're supposed to be the ones looking after you and the ones working. You're still a kid, so it's okay to be like, hey, it's a lot. It's a lot. So what if they do things too you still deserve to be happy? I don't know. He went silent, unmoved. Nicholas was the one who caused trouble, but somehow Derek had made himself the bad guy. It was unsettling, but Derek wasn't anywhere close to really being grown up. Of course, it was upsetting. Of course, he couldn't be perfect, even though he acted like he thought he should be. Derek, remember when your dad first came to the pool and you, Jorge, and Nicholas were all so excited? You were just like your brothers. Even if you're in charge sometimes, you're still your parents' kid. You don't have to act like an adult, especially not with me. Finally, slowly and carefully, Derek dared to glance at you again. Thanks, Blake, for saying all that. His shoulders squished inward to frame his lower head. He looked so much like a hopeful puppy that he could even give Nicholas a run for his money in the adorable face department. It really doesn't bother you that I complain and sometimes hanging out with me means helping out with 2 other kids? For all the confidence Derek displayed, when push came to shove, he was pretty insecure about himself and what you thought of him. I love hanging out with you no matter what, 1000%. Derek showed his full face to you. It was all lit up by the light shining through the water. The smile on his face was just as glittering. I don't ever want to be a pain, but it's really cool to have a friend who doesn't mind listening to me and being there. He didn't say that lightly. He only wanted to let himself be there for you and everyone else. Being somebody Derek could count on was special. His cheeks flushed just admitting it, but with the way your heart fluttered, you were sure your face was a match. Then his eyebrows furrowed mischievously, and just like that, he catapulted right off the tile edge into the pool. You gasped as if you were the one who suddenly got plunged underwater. Derek burst through the surface with a loud, gasping laugh. The water is great. I would definitely laugh at him for being a goof. Everything's gonna be good, Blake. I'm not an adult. That was true. Push yourself right off the pool after him. In an instant, you were hit with an explosion of bubbles as you sunk down into the water. You waited until you felt the pool floor, then kicked off it and popped your head out of the water. Woo! Derek pumped both his fists in the air. His black wristbands drooped further down his arms, heavy from being soaked. The 2 of you paddled through the water together. The added weight of your clothes had you both winded pretty quick. That only amused Derek more. The laughter and sloshing water brought the once stagnant pool to life. You and Derek still had the place to yourself and made the absolute most of it. But eventually, Derek crawled up the stairs out of the pool. His baggy clothes poured out mini waterfalls with every step he took on land. Derek looked especially tiny with his drenched jersey draped over his frame. He waited there at the top of the steps for you to catch up, being the dripping gentleman he was. You held the rail, and with each step up the stairs, you felt the weight of your soaked clothes pressing down on you more. You got a thumbs up from Derek when you made it out. Then he carefully tipped his head to the side and tapped his hands against his ears to get the water out. All right, time to face the music. Having to go home dampened Derek's mood far more than the water on his body. He could do anything here in the wide-open pool with you as his only companion. Going back to his family came with countless expectations and responsibilities, but it still had to be done. Yeah. You gave a small nod, readying yourself for whatever might happen when you arrive at the Suarez condo. Without another word, you collected your shoes and you left the little oasis behind. Hold each other's hands, that's cute. His slippery fingers gripped you as tightly as they could. When you made it to the front door, Derek used a key from his pocket to open it. He hadn't forgotten to bring it, despite leaving under rushed and uneasy circumstances. Derek stood there in front of the unlocked door, just staring at it. Practical preparation was his forte. Making him ready for bumps in relationships was not. I've got your back, Derek. We can do it. Yeah. He took in a huge breath through his nose and turned the knob. The living room was quiet when you went inside. Jorge and Mr. Suarez had moved over to the kitchen and were busy putting together a puzzle. Mr. Suarez's shoulder blocked your view, so you couldn't see what the picture was supposed to be. Mrs. Suarez and Nicholas were nowhere in sight. You guessed they were still in the younger boys' bedroom. It was strange not to have someone cheer and shout when Derek walked through the door. There was a feeling of absence. We're back, he announced himself with an absolute lack of enthusiasm. He might as well have been calling off bingo numbers to an empty room. Mr. Suarez lifted his head and turned to face the both of you. At the same time, he eagerly pushed his chair away from the counter. I see. Thank you for coming home. The greeting he gave was so normal that it was weird considering how you and Derek each brought a bucket full of water absorbed in your clothes. Jorge offered a typical family greeting of his own, not taking his eyes off the puzzle. He was either focused or avoiding the awkwardness. Welcome back. Derek silently poked a bare, big toe onto the prickly entryway doormat. The mess Derek's foot was making was too much for the little mat to contain. Water leaked out from the edges. Derek's attempt to face his family was going equally smoothly. The bright pleasantries of Mr. Suarez's face softened into warmth. He followed through on the motion he started and got out of his chair. He crossed the living room to stand with the two of you at the front door. My hard-working son is always in demand, Our family needs to learn how to share, especially Nicholas. The last part was said with a little chuckle. Derek didn't smile from the compliment, but he did start to blush. Excuse us. A new voice came from the hall. Mrs. Suarez stood there with her hands on her hips. Peeking out from behind the skirt of her dress was a distinct spiky nest of brown hair. Now that you're here, someone has something he wants to say to his big brother. Her words got Jorge to actually turn away from the puzzle and watch the scene, but Nicholas remained hidden. Her encouragement wasn't enough. As always, he was waiting for Derek. You didn't need to tell Derek that, though. He knew it far better than you. He shifted his weight on his feet and gave Nicholas an invitation. Okay, then. What did you want to say? Nicholas darted out from behind his mom with enough speed to flutter her dress. His tiny feet thundered over the floor until he came to an abrupt stop right in front of his favorite person. He had to lean his head all the way back to look into Derek's eyes. Derek looked down to meet the gaze. Nicholas resisted the urge to hug him and instead clutched at the collar of his own shirt. "I'm sorry. That's your room." From how much Nicholas struggled to explain his apology, it was obvious he wasn't at a point where he understood why being together at all times wasn't a completely fantastic idea. All that had gotten through was that he'd upset his brother, and that had in turn upset him. Nicholas bit his lip and moved his hands to pull at the bottom of his shirt instead of the top. The best he could come up with next was simply repeating himself. "Sorry." Derek's lips quirked just a bit as he patiently listened to his little brother. "You should say sorry to them too. Blake helped you a lot today too." Nicholas instantly twisted his head towards you and echoed the word. He was very serious. "Sorry, Blake." "Ah, thank you." Nicholas hopped up on the pads of his feet as a nervous but hopeful energy came over him. Your reaction was the first positive sign he'd gotten. The smallest Suarez glanced between you and Derek unsurely. He let his shirt go and balled his hands into fists. "I'm sorry, Derek. I'm sorry, Blake." Nicholas put everything he had into willing whatever problem he caused to be fixed and into people not feeling bad anymore. The emotional display of regret moved someone in the room to speak. "I'm sorry, too." Derek snorted a laugh at the unexpectedness of the interjection. "What did you even do?" "I don't know." The middle child looked down at the puzzle in front of him again, but he was staring through the pieces as if they weren't there. He murmured just barely loud enough to hear from where you were standing. "You and Blake had to watch me today too." Derek's hesitancy completely crumbled and his usual familial dynamic came back in full force. "Aw, Jorge, you don't have to apologize for that. I like to have some time by myself or with my friends, but I'd never want to stop having my little bros." Nicholas's massively wide eyes sparkled. For the first time since they were reunited, he carefully reached out to Derek and gripped his soaking wet jeans. Derek reached down to gently pat his baby brother's head as he did probably every day. Neither boy cared that this time the hand was damp. Instead, they both smiled at the other with unwavering affection. No matter what visions happened, it was inevitable that it would end that way because they both loved their family equally and deeply. Another person took a turn to cut in as Mr. Suarez spoke up with vigor. "Derek, Blake, let's race." "What?" Derek chuckled at your confusion and switched his head pat into a full-on hair ruffle. Nicholas giggled excitedly along with his brother. "Dad is asking us to play a video game, an old kart racer he likes." "Yes, and I will win it." Derek's dad cheerfully tacked that on. It couldn't be forgotten, clearly. Jorge could be player 4. Mrs. Suarez was the only one who truly kept her distance during the reconciliation between Derek and Nicholas, but now she joined the rest of the family. When she was close enough to you and Derek to whisper, she pressed a hand to the corner of her mouth and winked conspiratorially. "I'll give Nico an unplugged controller." Derek grinned at that point and shifted into giving the longest strands of Nicholas's hair a friendly tug, but he didn't accept the invite immediately. He included you in the discussion. "What do you think, Blake?" "It's up to you." He nodded at you and turned to answer his father. All right, let's race. Derek's mom encouraged you and Derek with her words, and Nicholas with her hands, taking him by the shoulders. This time, she wouldn't be letting him get away from her. Go get changed. We'll plug it in so it's ready by the time you're back. Blake, you're welcome to use my or Mr. Suarez's pajamas. If Derek doesn't have anything you can borrow. It'll be big, but it's better than nothing. Thanks, Mom. Derek's mood continued to be buoyed by the support of his parents, and he left to go get changed while walking as lightly as he could in his wet clothes. He followed the watery footprints he left behind to dry off too. He did a quick change while you waited with a towel wrapped around you to minimize your clothes dripping. He came out of his room wearing black sweats and a matching top. Now that he wasn't spilling water wherever he went, he offered to get you something to wear. Derek rattled off what kinds of pajamas his family had on hand. Ultimately, yeah, sure, why not? It was expectedly sporty and flexible. Derek was ready to go, even in his sleepwear. While you hadn't been planning ahead about what you'd do after jumping into the pool, it led to wearing some of Derek's clothes. Was a very, very acceptable result. Derek gave you a quivering thumbs up without making eye contact. It was like you were suddenly in Victorian times, and just looking at someone in their sleeping clothes was a grand pas. He bundled up the pile of wet clothes and carried them off to the laundry. He spoke over his shoulder as he walked as fast as he could with dripping clothes in his arms. I'll get your stuff back to you next time I visit, okay? Okay. As promised, the Suarez's dark purple GameCube was fully connected with 4 controllers plugged in by the time you and Derek strolled into the living room wearing your new digs. A familiar sound filled the whole room. All was right in the world. Derek's back! Yep, Nico, I'm here. Mrs. Suarez was on the carpet with Nicholas in her lap. She'd already passed him a controller, and he was having a blast pressing the clicky buttons, despite the fact they did nothing except make a little noise. Jorge and Mr. Suarez took seats on the couch. Jorge tucked himself closely against his father, so the two were only taking up one side. The other half of the couch was reserved for you and Derek. Derek dove into the spot next to Jorge. He got settled in nicely against the plush back of the couch and folded his legs up across the cushion. He got in the final place and relaxed against the armrest. Jorge passed one controller to Derek, which Derek gave to you. Then he handed over a second, which Derek kept. Mr. Suarez filled you in on a decision he and his second son had made. Junior and I are on a team. You and Blake can play together. What do you think? Derek tilted his head your way. He lifted his shoulders and added on to his dad's briefing. It's a double racer. One drives, the other controls items. Sounds cool. Great. It's me and you then. The deal was sealed. Packs had been made. Jorge perked up and shook Mr. Suarez's arm. Hey Dad, we're Team Suarez. Yes, we are. Derek's fingers were on the buttons, and he leaned over his crossed legs in anticipation for the game to begin. He replied unbothered. Cool for you guys. With his gaze still glued to the TV, a cheeky grin pulled at his lips. Derek spoke one more thing under his breath that was meant just for him, but you were sitting close enough to still catch it. I don't mind being Team Thrasher. He giggled sweetly. Being squished into a couch so close to him felt even warmer. All 4 players making up the 2 teams chose their characters, carts, positions, and the track set. To start, Derek and Mr. Suarez were driving, and you and Jorge had item launching duty. 3, 2, 1. The carts launched across the starting lines with both drivers getting an extra boost. Team Thrasher and Team Suarez were off down the colorful jungle road. There would be 3 laps before the race was over. Lap 1 was a frantic race for the top spot. The carts were neck and neck to each other over every hill and around each curve, neither getting ahead or falling behind. Attacks were constantly exchanged, and buttons were pressed at rapid speeds. That included Nicholas as he watched the race and tried to use his controller the way everyone else was. You wondered which part of the game he thought he was impacting. By lap 2, Team Thrasher had taken a strong lead. Almost nothing from the Suarez camp could reach your cart. Once he passed the line to start lap 3, Derek was cocky enough to bring out the smack talk. "I thought you were going to win, Dad." Mr. Suarez's expression was perfectly content. More than that, it was serene. And it was with the calm face Derek's father carefully reached across Jorge and then in the blink of an eye locked his large hand around the comparatively tiny controller Derek held. "Hey!" The cart you and Derek shared went out of control, careening off the dirt path into a pit. You had to wait for the game to fish you out and place you back on the road. Team Suarez rolled on right past. "See, I'm winning now." Derek's dad was boldly unapologetic. He grinned like a child who just found out that you could get a hole-in-one at putt-putt golf if you just dropped the ball in the hole. "You're cheating now." Derek sputtered with laughter made of equal parts amusement and disbelief. He yanked his arms towards his chest to fight for freedom, but Mr. Suarez's grip was unmovable. "We're running interference, huh?" From a distance, Mrs. Suarez mused over the situation that had begun to unfold. Her husband stole a look at where she'd been sitting. She was gone, leaving only Nicholas on the floor. Mr. Suarez lifted one thick eyebrow and pressed the other lower. He could only puzzle over what it might mean until it all became clear by the world going dark for only him. Derek's mom had crawled over behind the couch, popped up from behind, and slipped her fingers under Mr. Suarez's glasses. He was caught completely off guard. "Ah!" His father started from the shock of a surprise attack that wasn't committed by himself. "Y'all, hold on 1 second. His father started from the shock of a surprise attack that wasn't committed by himself. "Yeah, Mom." Derek hadn't gotten his controller back. Mr. Suarez was stubborn in his hold, but his dad was just as incapacitated as the driver. "Yeah, Mom." An echo of Derek's cheer came from behind. All the excitement in the air had stirred a fire in Nicholas. He wasn't just playing with an off controller anymore. He crawled on all fours at a rapid pace until he reached the couch and launched himself right at his dad's stomach. It was powerful enough that Mr. Suarez sprung forward and Mrs. Suarez's hands were yanked off him. Oof. But Derek's controller was finally freed. Mr. Suarez had to let go of both controllers to catch his squirming child. Nicholas would not be contained. He climbed over his dad's shoulders and wrapped his arms around Mr. Suarez's face. In sweet justice, the Team Suarez cart flew off a bridge into the abyss below. "Yeah, Nicholas." Jorge placed his own controller in his lap with a shake of his head and a smirk. Team Suarez wasn't winning this race. Derek rolled his shoulders and poked a tongue out of the corner of his mouth in concentration. He was back in business. The Team Thrasher cart course corrected and raced towards the finish line of the final lap. The youngest Suarez hugged all 4 of his limbs around his dad even tighter from the thrill of seeing Derek speed his car around the track. Yeah. Items weren't needed now, but you were just as invested in watching your cart make the last stretch. And Derek brought it home, crossing the finish line. We won! Derek threw his fists into the air, pumping them back down into his chest, and turned to you with a palm held out for you to smack. Clap his hand. The clear sound of your high five was a proper victory note. We won! Nicholas sent his arms towards the sky, a perfect imitation of his eldest brother. Mr. Suarez used the opportunity to collect his son from off his shoulders and placed Nicholas into his lap. He pet his son's hair and he laughed, breathless but full of joy. Okay, I lost. Next race. This time, Derek repeated the phrase, still raring to go. But that was naturally followed by the original copycat. Nicholas clapped gleefully and snuggled up against his seat on his father's chest. Next race. Jorge picked up his abandoned controller once more. His voice was quieter, but no less sincere. Yeah, next race. In all the commotion, you'd completely forgotten you could have switched to the driver role to take over for Derek at any time. Jorge could have too for his dad, but you were glad it went the way it did. Team Thrasher got its win from the assistance of team pile drivers Nicholas and Mrs. Suarez. And the game was just getting started. Next race. You couldn't help joining the pattern. It got big smiles from the family. Well, now this is a real party. There's still pizza in the fridge. Who wants leftovers? The suggestion of food riled Nicholas up even more. He clambered over his dad's shoulders for the second time, tugging on his beard and accidentally knocking his glasses off. Mr. Suarez wheezed out a chuckle. Nicholas stared out from over the couch into the kitchen. He wanted that pizza, but couldn't be the first to ask. Pizza, please. Pizza, please. Me too. Jorge and Mr. Suarez chimed in their own request. Can I have some, Mom? I would like some pizza, my beloved wife who never turns against me. She snickered with a glint in her eyes. Of course, start the game, I'll heat it up. All 4 of the Suarez men spoke in unison. Thanks, Mom. Thank you too. You're welcome. The players all resumed their positions and took up their tools, slightly sweaty GameCube controllers. When the second race started, the grin on Derek's face was one of the most radiant you'd seen the whole day. His dad, mom, and brothers too really knew how to make Derek happy. That brought a smile to your face too. From getting a window into Derek's life, and from what you knew from your own, spending every day with the same people could take a lot of patience, but there were a lot of perks too. Your time at the Suarez household ended with family, food, and fun. There wasn't much more you could have asked for. Holy crap, that was like the longest moment ever. Damn. So based off of that, I don't even know if we have time. 'Cause they vary so much, and I'm gonna feel bad if I start the lemonade moment and can't finish it. Okay, I am going to step away for a minute and weigh my options. We might end up wrapping up soon just for the sake of like not getting halfway through a moment, but I will think about it and come back in a minute with a conclusion. Sorry, y'all. Okay, so after giving it a minute to think, I am unfortunately just gonna call it here. For the simple fact of I really can't do a longer Twitch stream tonight. Theoretically, depending on what happens, maybe we'll do a slightly longer stream soon. But yeah, I don't know how long Lemonade is. I don't want to start it and then not be able to see it out because I've done so good at like leaving with clear cut like breaks. So we are gonna save it here. I apologize, y'all. I try and give you the full 3 hours to the best of my ability. I didn't even take like breaks to step away today. I stopped like once. For like a couple seconds because Yoda was doing something. But okay, I guess ending early isn't too bad. One night, taking 1 hour off once in a while will be fine. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I appreciate you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your night and whatever you get up to. And we will continue with Derek tomorrow. But as always, take care of yourselves, be kind to yourselves. It's hard being a person, you're doing the best you can. I am proud of you. And don't forget to live a life that pisses off a bigot. Bye, y'all.